The poor cleaning lady blew bubbles to calm a little boy, not knowing that the Millionaire CEO was watching. Before the story begins, leave a comment telling us which city you're watching from. And at the end, don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. Enjoy the story. The scream echoed through the marble lobby of Rhodes Tech like a fire alarm. Executives in $3,000 suits froze with their organic lattes suspended in midair. Secretaries stopped typing, and even the security guard at the front desk, a 2-meter former Marine, stood as still as a statue. David Rhodes, only 6 years old, was on the floor of Miami's most expensive lobby, thrashing as if the world were collapsing on his small head. "Somebody do something," cried Margaret, the executive assistant, looking around desperately. "Where's his therapist?" "She went to lunch," another executive answered, sweating nervously. "And his father?" "Meeting with Japanese investors." Meanwhile, David kept screaming, covering his ears and trembling. The adults around him formed a useless circle, whispering to one another, as if they were watching a bomb about to explode. That was when Annabella Carter appeared. Pushing a cleaning cart that squeaked louder than a horror movie door, she came out of the service elevator, wearing a slightly wrinkled navy blue uniform, her curly hair slipping out of a ponytail. At 28, she had the relaxed air of someone who had seen it all and wasn't impressed by much. "What's all this noise?" she muttered, chewing gum with the elegance of someone who doesn't care about corporate protocols. When she saw the scene, she stopped, observed, rolled her eyes. "Seriously? 15 educated adults watching a child in crisis, and nobody is doing anything?" Margaret turned, annoyed. "Excuse me, but you are?" "The cleaning lady who's going to fix this, while you all stand there like store mannequins." Without asking permission, Annabella stepped through the circle of executives and crouched down next to David. The boy was curled up, rocking back and forth, repeating, too loud," like a desperate mantra. "Hey, champ," she said in the softest but still steady voice she could manage. "It's okay, I know it's hard." David didn't even look. He kept rocking. Annabella sighed and looked at the ceiling, as if asking the heavens for patience. Then, with a playful smile, she pulled a small bottle of soap, the kind she used to wash windows, out of her pocket. "Have you ever seen real magic?" she asked, unscrewing the lid. She dipped the wand into the liquid and with a gentle blow created a perfect bubble that floated in the air like a tiny crystal sphere. The entire lobby fell silent. David stopped rocking. Still trembling, he lifted his eyes and saw the bubble dancing in the light of the crystal chandeliers. Then another one and another. "They're just bubbles," Margaret whispered in disbelief. "Relax, honey," Annabella replied without taking her eyes off David. "They really are just bubbles. I promise they won't ruin the stock price." One of the bubbles landed on David's small hand. He stared at it with fascination, and for the first time in 2 years, something even his $500 an hour private therapist had not achieved. The boy smiled, a genuine smile, shy but real. "More," he whispered. Annabella blew more bubbles, creating an iridescent shower that turned the corporate lobby into something magical. David was mesmerized, trying to touch each one with his little fingers. "How did you?" Margaret began, but was cut off by the sound of Italian shoes striking the marble. Samuel Rhodes had arrived. The CEO of Rhodes Tech Media Group was the kind of man who entered a room and automatically became its center of gravity. Tall, impeccably dressed, with icy blue eyes that made billionaires sweat in board meetings. At 35, he had turned his startup into a true empire, and carried the arrogance of someone who never heard the word no. "What on earth is going on here?" His voice sliced through the air like a blade. Every executive turned like soldiers at attention. Margaret swallowed hard. "Mr. Rhodes, David had an episode, but now he's 2 years." Samuel exploded, completely ignoring the scene with the bubbles. 2 years paying specialists, therapists, behavioral consultants, and not one of them, not one, can handle a simple crisis. He scanned the lobby, clearly searching for someone to fire on the spot. Then he saw David, sitting on the floor, quietly laughing as a bubble popped on his nose. And he saw the woman crouched beside him. Annabella was slipping the bottle into her pocket, getting ready to leave quietly. She knew the type, a stressed executive who yelled first and thought later. Better to step out before things turned ugly. "You," Samuel pointed straight at her. Who are you? Annabella stood up slowly, wiping her hands on her uniform. Annabella Carter, morning shift, 3rd floor. How did you do that? Do what? That. He gestured vaguely toward David, who was now drawing imaginary circles in the air. He's calm. Oh, that. Annabella shrugged. Soap bubbles. Ultra-secret technique I learned on YouTube. The sarcasm in her voice made a few executives cough nervously. Nobody talked to Samuel Rhodes like that. Nobody. YouTube. He repeated, as if she had just said she learned voodoo. Yes, that site with cat videos and tutorials for everything. You must have heard of it. Margaret was practically having a heart attack. 2 security guards approached quietly, clearly waiting for the order to escort Annabella out of the building. But Samuel didn't explode. Instead, he looked at his son, really looked, and saw something he hadn't seen in a long time. David was at peace. Not frightened, not frozen in fear, just present. Dr. Harrison charges $15,000 per session, Samuel murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. $15,000, and she fixes it with window cleaner. Technically, Annabella corrected, it's multi-purpose cleaning solution. But who's asking, right? This time a few executives laughed quietly and immediately hid it when Samuel shot them a look. David walked up to Annabella and tugged on her blouse. More bubbles tomorrow? Of course, champ. If I'm still working here tomorrow. The words hung in the air like one of the bubbles. Samuel studied her from head to toe, the simple uniform, the defiant posture, the way she didn't look away when he stared at her. There was something there. Something his team of experts didn't have. Courage, maybe? Or simply the fact that she saw David as a child, not as a corporate project. Margaret, he said without taking his eyes off Annabella. Yes, sir? Cancel my 3 o'clock meeting. But sir, those are the investors from... I said cancel. His voice had that tone that allowed no argument. Then he turned fully to Annabella, studying her as if she were a complicated puzzle. The entire lobby held its breath. I want this woman in my office, Samuel finally said, his voice echoing through the marble. Now. Samuel Rhodes' private elevator climbed the 50 floors of Rhodes Tech like a spaceship heading for the top of the world. Annabella watched the digital numbers change and couldn't help but smile ironically. First time in the VIP elevator, huh? She said, adjusting the cleaning cart she had insisted on bringing along. Normally, I use the service one, the one that smells like old coffee and corporate despair. Samuel didn't answer. He was typing furiously on his phone, probably canceling 3 more meetings while trying to process what had just happened downstairs. The doors opened on the 50th floor, the CEO's private domain. The office was bigger than Annabella's entire apartment, with huge windows that showed all of Miami stretched out like a luxury map. Italian designer furniture, inexplicable paintings, and a mahogany desk that looked like it had been carved by angels. Impressive, she said, pushing the cart through the room. All that's missing is a helipad, and you'd be Batman himself. Sit, Samuel ordered, pointing to one of the leather chairs in front of the desk. I'd rather stand, less formal. He stopped halfway to sitting and stared at her. Excuse me? You heard me. I'd rather stand. Samuel blinked a few times as if his brain was rebooting. It was probably the first time in 10 years anyone had refused him a direct order. All right, he said slowly, staying on his feet too. Let's get straight to the point. I want to hire you. I'm already hired? 3rd floor, remember? Not for cleaning, for David. Annabella crossed her arms. I'm listening. Samuel switched into CEO presentation mode. Straight posture, firm voice, controlled gestures. The man who led billion-dollar meetings. Temporary position as a special care assistant. Salary of $80,000 a year, 4 times what you make now. Premium health plan, performance bonuses, and a company car. Annabella whistled softly. Wow, with all that money, I could finally buy name-brand detergent. There are some conditions, Samuel continued, ignoring the sarcasm. He picked up a folder from the desk and began to read as if it were a legal contract. First, you will work under the constant supervision of our team of child psychologists. Second, all activities with David will be monitored and documented. Third, you will strictly follow the protocols established by Dr. Harrison. And fourth, stop. Samuel looked up from the paper. Excuse me? I said stop. I've heard enough. She walked up to the desk and leaned on it with both hands, staring straight into Samuel's blue eyes. Being so close made her a little dizzy, The man smelled of expensive cologne and power, but she wasn't about to show it. "Let me get this straight," she said slowly. "You want to pay me a fortune to do exactly what 15 specialists already tried and failed? Their methods are scientifically proven. And mine worked in 2 minutes." Samuel clenched his fists. "Listen here, Miss Carter." "Annabella, and no, Mr. Rhodes, you listen here." Her tone shifted completely, still firm, but with a natural authority that made Samuel step back half a pace. "If I wanted to be spied on 24 hours a day, I'd start a YouTube channel and at least make money from the views. The conditions are not negotiable. Then we don't have a deal." Samuel blinked again. "Excuse me? You heard me. I don't accept. You're turning down $80,000? I'm turning down being treated like a lab experiment." Annabella stepped away from the desk and began walking around the room, looking at the trophies and diplomas on the walls. "Impressive resume," she said casually. "Harvard Business School, Forbes 30 Under 30, Entrepreneur of the Year. But where's the diploma in being a father?" The question hit Samuel like a punch. "How dare you?" "Oh, did I hit a nerve?" She turned toward him with a smile that mixed challenge and compassion. "How many therapists has your son had?" "That's none of your business." 14, she said, as if she had read the answer on his face. 14 very expensive professionals who treated David like a project, not like a child. Samuel dropped heavily into the chair, suddenly looking much older than his 35 years. "He was connected," he murmured. "Downstairs with you. He was really present. I haven't seen that since." "Since when?" "Since his mother died." The silence filled the room like a heavy cloud. Annabella felt her chest tighten, but kept her posture firm. "So do you want results or do you want control?" she asked softly. "Both. You can't choose one." Samuel looked up at her, and Annabella saw something very few people probably had: fear. The fear of a father who was losing his son and didn't know how to stop it. "He avoids me," Samuel admitted. "When I get home, David runs to his room. When I try to talk, he just shuts down." "And you think more rules and protocols will change that? Then what do you suggest?" Annabella came back to the desk, but this time sat on the edge of it, swinging her legs like a child. The informality made Samuel frown. "My conditions," she said. "No supervision, no cameras, no pointless protocols. I worked my way." "Impossible. And no interference from you." "He's my son." "Exactly, your son, not your corporate project." Samuel shot up, the chair scraping against the floor. "You don't understand the responsibility that—" "I understand perfectly. You're afraid." "I'm not afraid of anything." "Yes, you are. Afraid of losing control, afraid of trusting someone, and most of all," she paused, letting the words weigh in the air, "afraid of discovering that maybe the problem isn't David." Samuel's face turned red. For a moment, Annabella thought he was going to explode. Shout. Call security. Instead, he gave a bitter laugh. "You've got nerve, I'll admit that. Or I'm crazy, still deciding." Samuel walked to the window and looked out over the city. Annabella could see the tension in his shoulders, the internal battle between the controlling CEO and the desperate father. 24 hours, he finally said, without turning around. "You have 24 hours to accept the deal, Carter, or you'll never get near him again." Annabella slid off the desk and grabbed the cleaning cart. At the door, she stopped and glanced over her shoulder. "Perfect," she said with a smile full of provocation. "And you have 24 hours to decide if you want results or control." The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving Samuel alone with his trophies and his wounded pride. On the other side, Annabella pressed the elevator button and whispered to herself, "This is going to be interesting." 22 hours later, Annabella was standing in front of the most intimidating electronic gate she had ever seen. The Rhodes mansion stretched along the Miami Beach coast like a palace of glass and steel, all straight lines and perfect angles that looked as if they had been drawn by a soulless computer. "Holy cow," she murmured, pressing the buzzer. "And here I thought the company building was over the top." A robotic voice answered through the intercom. "Identify yourself." "Annabella Carter. I'm here to play Mary Poppins, just without the magic umbrella." Pause. The security system was probably not programmed to recognize sarcasm. "One moment, please." The gate slid open silently, revealing a stone pathway that led to the main entrance. Annabella walked slowly, noticing the perfectly symmetrical gardens. Not a single leaf out of place. Not a flower daring to grow beyond what was allowed. "You know what's missing here?" she whispered to the wind. "A little bit of childhood mess." The front door opened before she could even reach the bell. A woman in her 60s, dressed as if she were going to a very formal funeral, greeted her with a forced smile. "Miss Carter? I'm Mrs. Patterson, the housekeeper. Mr. Rhodes is expecting you." Annabella stepped inside and nearly had to hold her jaw from dropping. The entrance hall was larger than her living room and kitchen combined, with a ceiling that soared at least 30 feet high and a marble staircase that looked straight out of a princess movie. But what struck her most was the silence. It wasn't just the absence of noise. It was as if the house itself were holding its breath, as if any sound would be a crime against architectural perfection. "Where's David?" she asked. "In the study. Mr. Rhodes insists he keeps to his routine." Mrs. Patterson led her through hallways that looked like museum galleries, priceless paintings on the walls, sculptures that probably cost more than a house, and not a single toy in sight. "Are there any specific rules I should know?" Annabella asked as they walked. "Several," Mrs. Patterson answered with a sigh she tried to hide. "No shoes in the living area, no food outside the kitchen, no excessive noise, no fun. Mr. Rhodes values order." "I can imagine." They reached a frosted glass door. Mrs. Patterson knocked gently before opening it. "David, your new assistant is here." The study looked exactly as Annabella had expected, cold, white, and intimidating. David was sitting at a table far too big for him, textbooks spread out in front of him. When he saw Annabella, his eyes lit up for a split second, but he quickly looked down again. "Hey, champ," she said, stepping into the room as if it were her own. "How about we put those books aside and you show me the rest of this fortress?" David glanced nervously at Mrs. Patterson, who cleared her throat uncomfortably. "Miss Carter, study time goes until 4 o'clock. "It's 2:15, Annabella checked her watch. "And from what I can see, this boy needs a break." Without waiting for permission, she held out her hand to David. "Come on, I'll show you a new trick." David hesitated, then took her hand. They left the study under Mrs. Patterson's disapproving gaze. "Where are we going?" David whispered. "Wherever you want. This is your house, isn't it?" David gave a small laugh. "But it doesn't feel like it." Annabella stopped in the hallway and crouched down to his level. "What do you mean it doesn't feel like it?" "There are too many rules, and I'm always too noisy." Annabella's heart tightened. "You know what? I love noise. The more, the better." David's eyes widened. "Really?" "Really. In fact, I have an idea." 10 minutes later, they were in the kitchen, a cathedral of stainless steel and marble that looked like it belonged on a TV show about famous chefs. Annabella had found a bowl, flour, eggs, and milk. "Are we making pancakes?" David asked, incredulous. "Nope. We're making the biggest kitchen mess in the history of Miami Beach." And that's exactly what they did. Annabella taught David how to crack eggs, half ended up on the floor, how to stir the batter, flour flew everywhere, and how to make pancakes in strange animal shapes. Most looked more like geological accidents. "This one's an elephant," David shouted, pointing at a pancake that resembled an amoeba with an identity crisis. "Definitely an elephant," Annabella agreed with complete seriousness. "Just an elephant that went through a blender." David burst out laughing. Real laughter, loud and free, without fear of bothering anyone. When Mrs. Patterson appeared at the kitchen door and saw the chaos, her expression was pure horror. "Miss Carter, what on earth are you doing?" "Experimental culinary art," Annabella replied, flipping a pancake in the air and missing the pan by a good 20 centimeters. "Oops, Mr. Rhodes does not allow food outside the dining area." "Then let's eat in the living room." "But, relax, Mrs. P. Can I call you Mrs. P? I'll clean everything up afterward." They set up a picnic right in the middle of the living room, that spotless room with white sofas that cost more than a car. Annabella spread a blanket on the floor, probably a very expensive blanket, but she pretended not to notice, and they sat down as if they were in a park. David was radiant, eating crooked pancakes, laughing at Annabella's bad jokes, and for the first time since she had met him, looking like a normal child. That was exactly when Samuel came home. Annabella heard his footsteps in the hall before she saw him. Firm, determined steps from someone used to finding everything exactly as he had left it. When he appeared at the door and saw the scene, the blanket on the floor, crumbs everywhere, David laughing with syrup on his face, his expression went through at least 5 different emotions in 2 seconds. Surprise, confusion, irritation, and something else Annabella couldn't quite identify. "What is this?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. "Lunch," Annabella answered casually, as if sitting on the floor of a $50,000 room was the most normal thing in the world. "On my sofa?" "Technically, on the floor. The sofa is untouched." Samuel took a deep breath, clearly ready to explode. "Miss Carter, there are rules in this house." "That are completely ridiculous," she cut in, standing up slowly. "This child lives in a glass box. How do you expect him to grow if he's not even allowed to laugh?" "He can laugh at the appropriate time." "Appropriate time to laugh?" Annabella let out an incredulous laugh. "What kind of schedule is that? From 9 to 10, moderate fun? From 10 to 11, controlled smiles?" "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly. You've turned your house into a museum and your son into an exhibit." Samuel stepped forward, his eyes flashing with anger. "This is my house, my rules. And this is your son." Annabella shot back, pointing at David, who had shrunk into the blanket when the shouting started. "Look at him. Look at how he reacts when you raise your voice." Samuel looked, and he saw David trembling, his eyes wide with fear. "You're fired," he said through his teeth. "Get out of my house, now." Annabella was already reaching for her bag when she felt 2 small arms clutch her leg. "Don't go," David whispered, his voice breaking. "Please, don't go." The silence that followed was deafening. Samuel froze completely. Those 3 words, "don't go," were something David had never, ever said to him. 3 days after the pancake incident, Samuel had done something no one expected. He changed his mind. Annabella not only kept her job, but she now officially lived in the guest wing of the mansion. David was happier than he had been in years, and even Mrs. Patterson admitted, in whispers, that the house felt more alive. Everything was going almost too well. That's when Elizabeth Whitmore decided to show up. Samuel's ex-fiancée arrived at the mansion on a Thursday afternoon, driving a white Maserati that matched her personality perfectly, beautiful on the outside, loud, and impossible to ignore. Blonde, elegant, and with a smile sharp enough to cut diamonds, Elizabeth had that kind of beauty that came with an instruction manual and a lifetime guarantee. "Samuel, darling." She practically sang as she entered the room, kissing the air near his cheeks. "I've missed you." Annabella, who was on the floor putting together a puzzle with David, looked up and immediately knew this woman meant trouble. It was a kind of female sixth sense. When an ex shows up unannounced, it's because she's plotting something. "Elizabeth," Samuel said, clearly uncomfortable. "What are you doing here?" "Well, I came to see how you're doing, and to meet the famous, what's her name again? Special nanny." Annabella slowly stood, wiping her hands on her jeans. "Annabella Carter, and you must be the ex who shows up uninvited." David laughed quietly, but Elizabeth kept her plastic smile. "How amusing. Samuel has always had good taste in creative employees." The word employees left her lips like something sticky on the bottom of her shoe. "Elizabeth," Samuel tried to step in, but she was already in full attack mode. "Actually, I came to invite you all to a little dinner I'm hosting. Nothing big, just a few investors, the folks from Forbes, maybe a photographer from Vanity Fair." Annabella crossed her arms. "Sounds fun, but I already have plans to wash my hair." "Ah, but I insist. It would be a wonderful opportunity for you to see Samuel's world. To see how the other half lives, you know?" Elizabeth's posh upper-class accent grew more pronounced with every sentence, and Annabella realized it was intentional, a performance to mark territory. "Elizabeth, I think," Samuel started. "Nonsense. It will be tomorrow night, 8 o'clock sharp. Formal attire, of course." She looked Annabella up and down. "I'm sure you'll find something appropriate." And she left like a whirlwind of expensive perfume and bad intentions. The next night, Annabella stood in front of the guest room mirror, looking at the only formal outfit she owned, the navy blue cleaning uniform, but the special event version, which was exactly the same as the normal one, only without detergent stains. "All right," she said to her reflection, "if she wants authentic working class, she'll get authentic working class." Samuel appeared in the doorway wearing a tuxedo that probably cost more than her car. "You don't have to go," he said. "Elizabeth can be difficult." Difficult is an understatement. She wants to humiliate me in public and prove that I don't belong in your world. And you do belong? Annabella turned to him with a smile that mixed confidence and mischief. I think we'll find out. The dinner was at the Fontainebleau, one of the most expensive hotels in Miami Beach. When Annabella and Samuel arrived, she could feel every guest's eyes on them, men in very expensive tuxedos and women in dresses that cost more than an economy car. There she was, in the middle of it all, in her work uniform, and with the attitude of someone who owes nothing to anyone. My God! Elizabeth appeared instantly, as if she had a radar for other people's embarrassment. Annabella, what an original choice of outfit. Thank you, Annabella replied cheerfully. I thought I'd represent the honest working people, you know, the ones who actually keep the world running. A few guests chuckled. Elizabeth forced a smile. Come, let me introduce you to everyone. What followed were 15 minutes of Elizabeth trying to humiliate Annabella in front of Miami's most important investors. Introductions like, "This is Annabella, our domestic help," and questions such as, "Tell us, dear, how does it feel to suddenly be living among the elite?" But Annabella did not take the bait. Instead, she answered with sarcasm and authenticity that had everyone laughing. Sorry, I've never been good with cutlery, she said when she dropped the dessert fork. But I can use a broom like no one else. It's surprisingly versatile. Cleaning, self-defense, pole dancing. The guests burst into loud laughter. Even the Forbes reporter was taking notes. Elizabeth was turning red with anger when her final plan went into action. Tell me, Annabella, she said, raising her voice so the whole table could hear, how exactly did you manage to infiltrate Samuel's life so quickly? It's rather impressive how you earned his trust. The tone made clear what she was implying. The table fell silent. Annabella set her glass of water down slowly. Are you asking if I used a vulnerable child to advance myself? Because that would be pretty low, even for someone who clearly peaked in high school. I'm just saying it's convenient how you appeared right when Samuel was most vulnerable. Elizabeth. Samuel's voice cut the air like a blade. Enough. But the damage was done. The chatter, the clinking of plates, the tension in the air, it all combined into a sensory overload that was too much for David, who had been quiet until then. Suddenly, the boy began to cry. Not just cry. Full panic mode, the kind that left adults paralyzed with helplessness. Elizabeth looked irritated. Samuel looked desperate. The other guests looked uncomfortable. But Annabella simply stood up, walked around the table, and pulled David into her arms. Hey, champ, she whispered, rocking him gently. Too loud, huh? I'm here. David clung to her as if she were a lifeline, his little body trembling with relief. And then, loud enough for the whole table to hear, he sobbed. Don't make her leave. Please. The silence that followed was deafening. Samuel rose slowly, his blue eyes fixed entirely on Elizabeth. When he spoke, his voice was low but absolutely terrifying. If you try to hurt her again, he said, each word precisely articulated, you will find out what I am truly capable of. Elizabeth's perfect smile finally cracked. The Rhodes Tech press conference was scheduled to announce the new investment program in educational technology. It was supposed to be a calm morning of corporate presentations and technical questions about innovation. But Elizabeth had other plans. Samuel was at the main podium in the company's auditorium, speaking to an audience of journalists, investors, and TV cameras. Annabella stood in the back, holding David's hand and trying to remain invisible. The boy had insisted on coming to see Daddy working, and she hadn't had the heart to say no. Everything was going smoothly until a blonde reporter stood up in the third row. Elizabeth Whitmore, Miami Business Journal, she introduced herself with a smile that looked sharpened overnight. I have a question about the recent changes in the family management of the company. Samuel frowned. Family matters are not the subject of this conference. But they are certainly relevant when they involve employees who might be exerting undue influence over corporate decisions. The auditorium went silent. The cameras turned automatically to where Elizabeth was pointing, directly at Annabella. I don't understand the question, Samuel said, but Annabella already knew she was in trouble. I'm talking about Annabella Carter, Elizabeth continued, her voice echoing through the sound system. A cleaning lady who, in just a few weeks, moved into your house and gained full access to your son. Don't you think the shareholders deserve to know about this unusual situation? All the cameras turned toward Annabella. Flashes went off. Microphones stretched in her direction like hungry snakes. "Miss Carter," a reporter shouted, "is it true you're living in the CEO's mansion? How did you get this position so quickly?" Another called out. "What exactly is the nature of your relationship with Samuel Rhodes?" Annabella felt David grip her hand more tightly. The boy was frightened by all the noise and commotion. She could have just run out, hidden, let Samuel handle the situation. Instead, she stepped closer to the microphones. "May I answer the questions?" she asked, with a calmness that surprised even herself. The auditorium fell into expectant silence. Samuel looked like he was about to have a heart attack. "First question. Yes, I'm living in the house, in the guest room, with a door that closes and everything. Very disappointing for anyone expecting soap opera drama." A few nervous laughs rippled through the audience. Second question. "I got the position because I did in 2 minutes what 14 very expensive therapists couldn't do in 2 years. Soap bubbles. Revolutionary technology. More laughter now, easier this time." Elizabeth wasn't amused. "Miss Carter, don't you find it suspicious that someone from such a humble background gained such close access to Miami's richest family?" "Humble background?" Annabella repeated, pretending to think. "You mean the fact that I work for a living? What a radical concept." "I'm suggesting there may be financial motives behind your actions." "Oh, I see. You're asking if I'm a gold digger." "Exactly." Annabella looked straight at the cameras and gave the most genuine smile she could. "Manipulative? Lady, I can barely manage my vacuum cleaner at home. That thing never listens to me." The auditorium burst into laughter. Even some of the journalists struggled to keep a straight face. "And about financial motives," she continued, "let me think. I gave up a steady cleaning job for a temporary position taking care of a child in crisis. From a financial standpoint, it was the dumbest decision of my life." "But the salary offered was substantially higher," Elizabeth pressed, "because the work is substantially harder. Ever tried getting an autistic child to eat vegetables? It's more complicated than negotiating a peace treaty." More laughter. Elizabeth was turning red. "Miss Carter, we can't ignore the obvious fact that a young, attractive woman is suddenly living in the house of a single billionaire. Are you implying I'm trying to marry him for money?" Annabella interrupted. "I'm simply pointing out some interesting coincidences." Annabella looked at Samuel, who was standing at the podium like a statue. Then she turned back to Elizabeth. "First of all, thank you for calling me attractive. Very kind. Second, if I wanted to marry for money, do you think I'd pick a man with a child who needs special care? I mean, if it were just about money, wouldn't it be easier to find a billionaire without emotional baggage?" The auditorium was divided between laughter and shock at her brutal honesty. "Third," she continued, "and most important, I don't need anyone to support me. I work. I manage. And if Samuel decides tomorrow that he doesn't want my services anymore, I'll go back to my normal life without drama or trauma." "But surely you must admit there are benefits in being so close." "The only benefit," Annabella interrupted again, "is seeing that wonderful child smile every day. And if you think that's little, then you don't understand anything about what really matters in life." Elizabeth was losing control of the situation. "Gentlemen investors, surely you can see the problem of having unqualified outside influences." "Unqualified?" Annabella laughed. "Miss, I turned a traumatized child into a happy boy. What qualification do you have that tops that?" At that moment, David let go of Annabella's hand and ran toward the podium. "David, no!" Samuel shouted, but the boy was already climbing the steps. "Daddy!" David called into the microphone, his voice echoing through the auditorium. "Why is the mean lady talking about my happy spark?" The silence was absolute. "Happy spark?" a reporter murmured. David looked at the audience with his wide, innocent eyes. "Annabella is my happy spark. She makes bubbles and pancakes and lets me be a kid." Elizabeth tried one last move. "David is clearly being manipulated. She isn't going away." David suddenly shouted, starting to cry. "You can't make her disappear. She's my family." The boy ran back to Annabella and threw himself into her arms, sobbing. "Don't let them take you. Please, don't leave me." Annabella knelt down and held David tightly, whispering words of comfort while the cameras captured every second. When she looked up, she found Samuel stepping down from the podium with an expression she had never seen before. Pure determination. He took the microphone and faced the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice cut through the silence like a sword, "this press conference is over." "But Mr. Rhodes," Elizabeth began. Samuel cut her off with a look that could freeze hell itself. "No one touches my son," he said, each word carrying absolute authority. "No one." 3 hours after the most embarrassing press conference in Miami's corporate history, the Rhodes mansion was under siege. TV vans filled the street, reporters camped at the gates, and news helicopters hovered above the property like hungry vultures. Annabella was in the kitchen making peanut butter sandwiches for David when Samuel appeared in the doorway with an expression she couldn't read. "We need to talk," he said. "About which part? The part where your ex tried to destroy me publicly, or the part where your son called me family on national TV?" Samuel ran a hand through his hair, clearly stressed. "About all of it." David was in the living room, hypnotized by a cartoon with the volume turned up to drown out the noise of the helicopters. They went up to Samuel's private office, far from curious ears. "This has to stop," Samuel said as soon as he closed the door. "What? The media? I completely agree. Let's call them and politely ask them to leave." "No, Annabella. This whole situation." She turned to face him, her stomach sinking. "Oh, I see. I'm being fired. Again. Not fired. Protected." "Protected?" She let out a bitter laugh. "From what? From having a life? From being happy? From finally finding a place where I feel useful?" "From me," he exploded, surprising them both with the intensity. "From me, from my crazy life, from the pressure, the paparazzi, all of this. Oh, how noble. The knight in shining armor saving the damsel in distress. Annabella, you don't understand. This life, it destroys people. I've seen it happen before." "To whom?" Samuel hesitated, then walked to the window overlooking the garden. "To David's mother. Helena." The name hung in the air like a ghost. "She wasn't prepared for it," he continued, his voice lower. "The public scrutiny, the constant criticism, the pressure to be perfect all the time. It started with anxiety, then depression, then—" "Samuel," Annabella said softly. "She died driving at night, alone, running from the paparazzi." He turned to her, his eyes shining with contained tears, "And I couldn't protect her." Annabella felt her heart tighten. "But I'm not her." "No, you're not. You're strong, brave, incredible. And that's exactly why I can't let this happen again. So your solution is to push me away? My solution is to keep you safe." "Safe?" Annabella let out a laugh that came out more like a growl. "Samuel, I was fired from 6 jobs in the last 3 years. Do you know why?" He shook his head. "Because I was just a cleaning lady who had opinions. Because I didn't bow my head when foolish bosses tried to humiliate me. Because I dared to believe I deserved to be treated with respect." She began walking around the room, her anger and frustration spilling over. "At my last job, the manager said I was above my social position because I suggested a more efficient way to organize the stockroom. Before that, I was fired for causing trouble. The trouble was reporting a coworker who was stealing." "Annabella, I promised myself," she went on, stopping in front of him, "that I would never bow my head again. Never again let anyone make me feel small because of my work or my background. And you think that's what I'm trying to do? You're telling me I'm not strong enough to handle your life, that I need to be protected. How is that any different?" Samuel looked at her for a long moment. "Because this time I truly—" The words fell between them like a confession. "What?" "I care about you," he repeated, stepping closer. "I care in a way I shouldn't, in a way that's dangerous for both of us." Annabella felt her breath catch. "Samuel, you came into my life like a storm. You turned everything upside down. You made my son smile. You made me smile. And now—" He paused, running a hand over his face. "Now I can't imagine life the way it was before you." They were only inches apart. Annabella could feel his warmth, the scent of aftershave and nervousness. "Do you think I don't feel the same?" she whispered. "Do you think it's easy for me to be here, in your house, seeing you every day and pretending it's just a job?" "Annabella, I fell in love, Samuel. I fell in love with you, with David, with this crazy life you two have. And if that means facing a dozen Elizabeth Whitmores and 1,000 gossip reporters, then so be it." They stared at each other now, the electric tension almost tangible. Samuel raised his hand and gently touched her face. You're going to end up getting hurt. Or maybe I'll end up being the best thing that ever happened to you. Maybe. He leaned in. She closed her eyes. The perfect moment, cinematic, charged with all the tension and emotion that had been building for weeks. Splash! The sound was followed by a sharp, all too familiar cry. Dad, Annabella, I slipped. They instantly pulled apart and ran downstairs, finding David sitting on the kitchen floor, soaked in water and soap, surrounded by an overturned bucket and wearing an expression of pure embarrassment. I was trying to make bubbles by myself, he exclaimed, dripping wet. But the bucket was too heavy. I tripped, and now everything is wet. I'm so sorry. And Annabella looked at Samuel. Samuel looked at Annabella, and then they both started laughing. Laughing hard. That kind of hysterical laughter that comes when all the built-up tension finally finds an escape. Nothing like soap on your feet to kill the mood, Annabella managed to say between laughs. David Rhodes, the official anti-Cupid, Samuel added, kneeling to help his son up. David looked back and forth between them, confused but relieved he wasn't in trouble. You're laughing. Is that good or bad? Good, Annabella said, grabbing a towel. Very good. As they cleaned up the mess, Samuel touched her arm. This conversation isn't over, he murmured. I know. She met his gaze with determination. And when we continue, I want you to understand one thing. I don't want protection, Samuel. I want to be by your side, even if the whole world is against us. Samuel held her gaze for a long moment before slowly nodding. Even if it's a battle? Especially if it's a battle. Outside, helicopters kept circling, reporters kept waiting, and Elizabeth was probably already planning her next move. But inside the soapy kitchen, for the first time in a long while, Samuel Rhodes felt something close to hope. The bomb went off on a Monday morning. Samuel was having coffee with David when Margaret burst into the kitchen, holding a tablet like a grenade ready to explode. Sir, we need to talk. Now. Annabella, who was preparing smoothies at the counter, immediately sensed something was very wrong. Margaret never entered the private area of the house, much less with that look of controlled panic. What happened? Samuel asked, but David was already getting restless with the tension in the air. In the study, please, Margaret insisted, casting a nervous glance at Annabella. 5 minutes later, Annabella's life collapsed. Hope for Children Foundation documents show suspicious transfers, Samuel read aloud, his face growing paler with every word. Diverted funds coincide with the hiring period of a household employee. What foundation? Annabella interrupted, genuinely confused. The company's charitable foundation, Margaret explained in a tone that mixed professionalism with apology, created to help children with special needs. I didn't even know it existed, Samuel kept reading. Anonymous source within the company confirms unauthorized access to corporate accounts. FBI investigation may be requested. FBI? Annabella felt her legs weaken. Samuel, you don't believe this, do you? He lifted his eyes from the tablet, and she saw something that crushed her. Doubt. The documents look legitimate, he said slowly. Documents can be forged. Annabella, I need to. You need what? To accuse me of stealing? To believe I would use money meant for children? I need to protect the company. The phrase echoed through the room like a gunshot. Annabella stepped back as if she had been struck. Ah, she said, her voice calmer than she expected. I see. The company comes first. That's not it. Of course it is. She forced a bitter smile. After all, I'm just a cleaning lady. Obviously I'm guilty, right? Margaret cleared her throat awkwardly. The board is meeting in an hour. They want answers. And I'll give them answers, Samuel said, but he didn't look at Annabella. An hour later, Annabella was in the mansion's library when she heard cars pulling up. Through the window, she saw men in suits stepping out of black Mercedes. The Rhodes Tech board had arrived for an execution. David appeared at the door, dragging his teddy bear. Why is everyone angry? He asked. Sometimes people get angry over silly things, she answered, trying to keep her voice steady. Are you leaving? The simple question nearly broke her. Maybe. Why? How could she explain to a 6-year-old that the adult world was cruel and unfair? That sometimes good people were sacrificed to protect powerful ones? Sometimes changes happen, champ. David walked closer and climbed onto the sofa beside her. Can you take me with you? Annabella's eyes burned. I can't, David. You belong here with your father. But you're my happy spark. And you'll always be my little champ, no matter where I am." Raised voices came from the office. She could make out Samuel's tense, defensive tone, mixed with the authoritative voices of older men. Fiduciary responsibility, full investigation. Either she goes or you go. The final ultimatum echoed down the hall like a death sentence. 20 minutes later, Samuel appeared in the library. His face was gray, aged 10 years in 1 hour. "Annabella. Let me guess, they want my head on a platter. The board is unanimous. As long as there's a pending investigation, you're firing me. I'm putting you on administrative leave." Which is a polite way of saying fired. Samuel moved closer, but she stood and stepped back. "You know I didn't do this," she said. "You know me." "I know, but the company comes first. Annabella, please." "Of course I stole millions with my mop," she said with cutting sarcasm. "Must all be hidden behind the vacuum cleaner. Brilliant plan." "This isn't a joke." "No, it isn't. It's a tragedy." She grabbed her bag. "The tragedy of discovering that the person you trusted doesn't trust you." "I do trust you." "No, Samuel, you don't. If you did, you would have defended me in there. You would have told the board that you know me, that you know my character." "They have documents. Fake documents. Elizabeth is behind this and you know it." "I can't prove." "You don't want to prove it. It's easier to sacrifice me than to face a fight." Samuel ran a hand through his hair, clearly desperate. "Annabella, give me time. I'll investigate. I'll find the truth." "How much time? Weeks? Months? Meanwhile I stay here being treated like a criminal?" "You can stay in the guest house? Like a prisoner under house arrest?" "No, thank you." She headed toward the door but stopped when she saw David watching from the doorway, his eyes wide with confusion and fear. "Are you really leaving?" he whispered. Annabella knelt down to his level, grabbed a piece of paper from the table, and scribbled quickly. "Keep making your sparks," she said, handing him the note. "And remember, you are amazing exactly as you are." David began to cry. "I don't want you to go." "I know, champ, I don't want you either." She hugged him tightly one last time, then stood and walked toward the door without looking back. "Annabella, wait!" Samuel shouted, but she was already going down the stairs. "Take good care of him," she said over her shoulder. "And when you realize I was right, because you will realize it, I hope it's worth it." The front door closed with a soft click. Samuel stood in the hallway, listening to the echo of his own footsteps. David had run to his room and slammed the door. The house, which only 3 days earlier had been filled with laughter and life, returned to its usual sepulchral silence. But now the silence was different. It was no longer order, it was emptiness. He walked to the window overlooking the entrance and saw Annabella's taxi disappearing through the gate. The perfectly symmetrical garden looked deader than ever. The expensive furniture looked cold. The paintings on the walls seemed to mock him. "Sir?" Mrs. Patterson appeared at the door. "Dinner is served." "David won't come down," Samuel murmured. He locked himself in his room. "And Miss Annabella?" Samuel closed his eyes and rested his forehead on the cold glass of the window. She took the light with her. 3 days after Annabella's departure, the Rhodes mansion had become a mausoleum of silence and wasted meals. David wasn't speaking, wasn't eating properly, and had stopped answering when called. Samuel tried to work, but spent most of his time staring at his phone, wanting to dial her number and unable to do it. On Thursday morning, Mrs. Patterson knocked on the office door with an expression Samuel hadn't seen since his wife's accident. "Mr. Rhodes," she said, her voice trembling, "David is not in his room." Samuel looked up from his papers. "What do you mean he's not there?" "I searched the whole house. He disappeared." The world stopped. Samuel ran upstairs, bursting into his son's room as if somehow David could still be hiding in an impossible corner. The bed was made. The window was closed, but on the study desk there was a drawing, 3 soap bubbles, 1 large, 1 medium, and 1 small. Underneath, in the crooked handwriting of a child, were the words "Our family." "Call the police," Samuel said, his voice calmer than he felt. "Now." Within 15 minutes, the mansion was filled with police officers, detectives, and technicians. Captain Martinez, a gray-haired man who had known the family for years, studied David's drawing. "Any idea where he might have gone?" he asked. "I have no idea," Samuel lied, because deep down he had a terrible suspicion that he knew exactly where David was. "And Miss Carter? The former nanny?" She has nothing to do with this. Mr. Rhodes, with all due respect, a 6-year-old doesn't run away to nowhere. He went looking for someone. Samuel clenched his fists. The truth was there, glaring like a neon sign, but admitting it meant admitting he had made the greatest mistake of his life. We'll need to mobilize a full search, the captain continued. Issue an Amber Alert, notify hospitals, do whatever you need to do. 2 hours later, the news had leaked. TV vans surrounded the mansion again, helicopters hovered over Miami Beach, and David's face was on every screen in the city. David ran away with a hand-drawn map, Samuel murmured to himself, staring out the window. At least he got my creativity. But the joke fell flat. There was nothing funny about a 6-year-old lost in a city of 3 million people. The phone never stopped ringing. Officers reported false leads. A blonde child seen at the mall, another at the airport, one more at the beach. All of them turned out to be false alarms. By 4 in the afternoon, Samuel couldn't stand still anymore. He grabbed his car keys and left, ignoring the shouts of reporters. Mr. Rhodes, any comments on the disappearance? Is it true there are family problems? Where is Annabella Carter? He drove aimlessly through the streets of Miami, visiting every place he could remember David mentioning. The mall where they bought ice cream, the children's bookstore, the beach where they built sandcastles. Nothing. It was as he passed Bayfront Park that the memory hit him like lightning. The park. The park where Annabella used to take David to get sunshine and blow bubbles. David had mentioned it many times, how they sat on the bench by the lake and she taught him bubble tricks. Samuel pressed the accelerator. He found David on the third bench by the edge of the lake, curled up like a little wet bird. The boy was still wearing the pajamas from when he had disappeared, holding a small bottle of soap, probably taken from the kitchen before he ran away. David. The boy lifted his eyes, red and swollen from crying. Daddy? Samuel approached slowly, as if David might vanish at any moment. What are you doing here, son? Waiting for her to come back, David said with devastating simplicity. She always came here, so I thought, if I waited. Samuel sat down beside him on the bench. David, Annabella doesn't know you're here. But she's going to show up, right? She said she'd always be my happy spark. Son, did she lie? David's voice cracked. Did she lie when she said she loved me? Samuel felt something break inside his chest. No, David, she didn't lie. Then why did she leave? The question hung in the air like an accusation. How could he explain to a child that his father had chosen to protect his reputation instead of fighting for the woman he loved? It's complicated. I don't understand complicated, David said, starting to cry again. All I understand is that she was our family, and now she isn't anymore. Samuel pulled his son into his arms and held him tightly, feeling his own tears start to fall. She's my spark, David sobbed against his chest. She's my spark, and you let her go. I know, son, I know. They stayed like that for long minutes, father and son crying together by the edge of the lake, while the sun began to set over Miami. Daddy? David finally asked. Can you bring her back? Samuel looked toward the horizon, where the city lights were just beginning to glow. Something inside him, something that had been buried under years of meetings, protocols, and fear of judgment, finally woke up. I can try. Promise? Samuel thought of Elizabeth and her lies. He thought of the board and their threats. He thought of the media and their hunger for scandal. He thought of everything he could lose if he decided to fight. Then he thought of Annabella laughing in the soapy kitchen. He thought of David running through the hallways, finally happy. He thought of how, for the first time in years, his house felt like a home. I promise, he said, and this time he knew he meant it. As they drove back home, with David finally asleep in the back seat, Samuel picked up his phone and dialed the number of the most expensive private investigator in Miami. Marcus, it's Samuel Rhodes. I need you to look into some bank transactions, and I also need you to find someone. Of course, sir. What's this about? Samuel glanced in the rearview mirror at his sleeping son, still clutching the bottle of soap solution in his small hand. About bringing my family back. When they got home, reporters exploded in flashes and shouted questions. Samuel carried David in his arms, ignoring the chaos around them. On the porch, he stopped and looked out at the horizon one last time. I'll bring you back, Annabella, he whispered into the night air, even if the world falls apart. And for the first time in 3 days, Samuel Rhodes smiled. Marcus Delgado was the kind of private investigator who could figure out the color of someone's underwear just by looking at their tax return. Expensive as a Lamborghini, but efficient as a Swiss computer. And in 72 hours, he handed Samuel a dossier that changed everything. "Congratulations, Mr. Rhodes," Marcus said, placing a folder on the table. "Your ex-fiancée is officially a criminal." Samuel opened the folder and his eyes widened. Bank statements, printed emails, WhatsApp conversations, even audio recordings. It was like watching a suspense movie, except the villain was real and had a full name. Elizabeth forged the documents? She forged them and even paid the foundation's accountant to validate the forgeries. $20,000 to Jason Miller. The man confessed everything once he realized he could be looking at 10 to 15 years in prison. Samuel ran his hand through his hair, feeling a mix of relief and anger strong enough to move mountains. "There's more," Marcus continued, pointing to a transcript. She recorded herself admitting she made it all up to free Samuel from that opportunist. She recorded her own confession? "Apparently your ex isn't very smart." She sent a voice message to her best friend, telling the whole plan. The friend, by the way, thought it was a joke until she saw the scandal on TV. Samuel closed the folder and leaned back in his chair. "Is it enough evidence? Enough to have her arrested and still sue for defamation, document forgery, and conspiracy? Do you want me to hand this to the district attorney?" "Not yet. First, I want to confront her myself," Marcus smiled. "Ah, classic revenge. I like your style." 2 hours later, Samuel walked into the Rhodes Tech boardroom with the folder under his arm and an expression that made the board members shift uncomfortably in their seats. Elizabeth was there, of course, sitting at the head of the table as if she owned the company, wearing a red suit that screamed confidence, but that Samuel now recognized as guilt. "Samuel, darling," she said with that plastic smile. "I'm so glad you came. We were just discussing the legal implications of the Carter case." "Great," Samuel interrupted, slamming the folder on the table hard enough to make all the water glasses shake. "Because I brought some very interesting legal implications." Elizabeth's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "What are you talking about?" asked Robert Blackstone, the chairman of the board. Samuel opened the folder and began handing out copies of the documents as if they were playing cards. "I'm talking about how we were all deceived by someone who apparently watched too many revenge movies and decided to try it in real life." Elizabeth went pale. "Samuel, I don't know what you're—" "Jason Miller confessed everything, Elizabeth. $20,000 to falsify documents. Very creative, I'll admit." The silence in the room was so deep you could hear the air conditioning running. "This is ridiculous," Elizabeth said, but her voice came out higher than usual. "Jason is clearly trying to escape blame by shifting." "Oh, there's more," Samuel went on cheerfully, placing his phone on the table. "An audio recording where you confess everything to your friend Jennifer. Want to hear it?" He pressed play. Elizabeth's voice echoed through the room. "It was genius, Jen. I made up everything about her stealing money from the foundation. Samuel is such a stickler he would never risk the company's reputation over a cleaning lady." The board members exchanged looks ranging from shock to deep embarrassment. "Elizabeth," Robert said slowly, "can you explain this?" I was joking. Jennifer knows I have a peculiar sense of humor." "Funny," Samuel said, "because the FBI doesn't usually have much of a sense of humor when it comes to forging federal documents." "FBI?" Elizabeth swallowed hard. "Oh yes, forgot to mention, I've already contacted them. Apparently, forging documents for a registered foundation is a federal crime. Who knew?" Elizabeth stood up abruptly, knocking over her chair. "You can't prove anything." "Actually," Samuel smiled, "I can prove everything. There's even security camera footage from the bank showing you handing the money to Jason." The look on Elizabeth's face was like watching a house of cards collapse in slow motion. "Samuel," she tried to change tactics, "you're making a mistake. If you give me a second chance." "Second chance?" Samuel laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Elizabeth, the only thing you've successfully led is the category of soap opera villain." A few board members laughed nervously. Robert banged the gavel on the table. "Elizabeth Whitmore, you are formally removed from any association with Rhodes Tech and its subsidiaries." Furthermore, we will fully cooperate with the authorities in any criminal investigation. You'll regret this, Elizabeth exploded. I know secrets about this company that could destroy all of you. What secrets? Samuel asked calmly. I know about the offshore accounts and the contracts with the Chinese company, and that deal with. Elizabeth, Samuel interrupted her softly, you're confusing our company with some soap opera you watched on TV. We don't have any illegal offshore accounts. And we never had questionable contracts with Chinese companies. And we definitely don't have secret deals. Our company is that boring, completely legal. Elizabeth's final defeat was so epic, Samuel almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Security, Robert called. Please escort Miss Whitmore out of the building. As Elizabeth was dragged out, still shouting empty threats, Samuel turned to the board. Gentlemen, I have a confession to make. Everyone turned to him. I made the biggest mistake of my life when I let Annabella Carter go. Samuel, Robert began. No, let me finish. You've known me for years. You know I'm controlling, calculating, that I always put business first. But Annabella, she changed everything. Samuel walked to the window that looked out over the lobby where it had all started. She made my son truly smile for the first time in years. She brought life back into my home. She reminded me that there are things more important than stock prices. He turned to face the board. And I sacrificed her to protect our reputation. That was cowardly and unforgivable. What are you saying? Asked Margaret. I'm saying I'm going to make a public statement. I'm going to admit my mistake, clear her name, and beg her to come back. And if she doesn't come back? Robert asked. Samuel smiled, and for the first time in weeks, it was a genuine smile. Then at least I'll sleep, knowing I did the right thing. 300 miles north, in a small cafe in Gainesville, Annabella was waiting tables and trying to pretend she didn't miss the organized chaos that had been her life in Miami. The cafe TV was tuned to the local news channel when her attention was caught by a familiar voice. Samuel Rhodes, CEO of Rhodes Tech, made a surprising statement. She stopped wiping the tables and looked at the screen. There was Samuel, standing at the company's podium, with David next to him holding a bottle of dish soap. Annabella Carter didn't steal anything from me, he said, looking straight into the camera. She's the only thing I truly want back. The plate Annabella was holding slipped from her hands and shattered on the cafe floor. The launch of the David Rhodes Foundation was taking place at the most luxurious hotel in Miami Beach. 500 guests, including celebrities, investors, and the entire Florida press, crowded into the grand hall decorated with blue and white balloons, David's favorite colors. Samuel stood on the main stage wearing his best tuxedo, but sweating as if he were running a marathon. David was at his side, fidgeting with a bottle of dish soap he had insisted on bringing for luck. Ladies and gentlemen, Samuel began his speech, we are here today to launch a foundation dedicated to children with special needs. But his eyes kept scanning the crowd, searching for one specific person. Annabella had arrived 15 minutes earlier, escorted by Marcus, who had literally picked her up at the cafe in Gainesville and practically kidnapped her back to Miami. Because I believe every child deserves to be understood and loved exactly as they are. There she was, at the back of the hall, wearing a simple blue dress Samuel had sent for her, looking completely out of place among Miami's elite, and completely perfect. Dad, David whispered into the microphone, making the whole hall hear, she came. Samuel froze in mid-sentence. 500 pairs of eyes turned to see where David was pointing. David, Samuel whispered, you weren't supposed to. I know, but she's here, David shouted into the microphone, making the speakers screech. Annabella, Annabella! The entire hall turned to look at her. Flashes went off. Cameras zoomed in, and Annabella had the terrible urge to run for the nearest exit. Going on stage with soap in my pocket was not in my resume, she muttered to herself. Samuel looked at her, then at the 500 guests waiting. He thought about protocols, the planned agenda, the speech he had rehearsed dozens of times, and he threw it all away. Annabella, he said into the microphone, would you please come up here? The hall fell into complete silence. The kind of silence that happens when 500 people hold their breath at the same time. I don't think she began, But David had already dropped the microphone and was running down the steps toward her. "You came back," he shouted, throwing himself into her arms. "I knew you would come back." With David clinging to her like a happy koala, Annabella had no choice. She slowly walked toward the stage, feeling as if she were trapped in one of those nightmare situations where you dream you're naked at school. Except this was real. And 500 people were watching. Samuel reached out his hand to help her onto the stage. When she took it, it was like an electric current passed between them. "What are you doing?" she whispered. "Something I should have done a long time ago," he answered. David ran to the microphone. "Everyone," he shouted, making the speakers protest again. "This is my happy spark." The audience began to laugh and applaud, but David wasn't finished. "She makes the best pancakes in the world and knows how to make giant bubbles and lets me be a kid and she's—" He stopped, looked at Samuel, then at Annabella, and asked the question that froze the entire event. "Dad, can I call her Mom now?" The silence that followed was deafening. Cameras clicked. Journalists scribbled furiously. And in the middle of all that chaos, Annabella felt tears streaming down her face. "David," she whispered, kneeling to his level. "You thought you'd never be enough," Samuel said softly into the microphone, making the whole hall hear. "Didn't you?" Annabella looked at him, surprised. "How did you?" "Because I thought the same thing. I thought I'd never be good enough for the two of you." The audience was completely captivated. Even the waiters had stopped serving champagne. "Samuel," Annabella began, but he raised his hand. "Let me finish, please." He turned to the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, you came here today for the launch of a foundation. But I need to be honest with you. This foundation exists because of this extraordinary woman." Samuel pointed at Annabella. "She taught me that love is not about protocols or control. It's about accepting someone exactly as they are, and about fighting for the one you love, even when the whole world is against you." "Samuel, you don't need to," Annabella began, but he was already going down on one knee in the middle of the stage. The hall exploded with whispers and exclamations. "I don't want an employee," he said, taking her hand. "I don't want a nanny. I want my partner. In everything." "Are you proposing marriage?" someone shouted from the audience. "I'm proposing much more than that," Samuel replied, still on one knee. "I'm proposing a family. Chaotic, imperfect, full of soap bubbles and crooked pancakes." David jumped with joy. "Does that mean yes?" Annabella looked at Samuel kneeling, at David bursting with happiness, at the 500 guests waiting for an answer, at the cameras capturing every second. And it was exactly at that moment that Elizabeth Whitmore decided to make her dramatic entrance. "Stop everything," she shouted, storming into the main hall dressed as if she were going to a funeral. "You cannot allow this farce." The hall turned to her like a tennis match. Security guards started moving toward her, but Samuel raised his hand. "Let her speak," he said calmly. Elizabeth marched up to the stage, her high heels striking the floor like a countdown to the apocalypse. "Samuel Rhodes, you are making the biggest mistake of your life," she declared dramatically. "This woman is a manipulator." "Elizabeth," Annabella interrupted softly, "you've already lost. Get over it." "I haven't lost anything." "Yes, you have. You lost your dignity when you forged documents. You lost your credibility when you were exposed. And now you're losing your sanity by making a public scene." The audience began to laugh. Elizabeth turned red with anger. "You'll regret this. All of you." "Probably," Annabella agreed cheerfully, "but at least we'll regret it together." Security finally escorted Elizabeth out while she screamed about injustice and conspiracy. When the drama left the stage, Samuel was still kneeling. "So," he said with a smile, "where were we?" "At the part where you were asking me to marry you in front of 500 people," Annabella replied, wiping tears from her eyes. "Ah, right. Annabella Carter, will you marry me and turn our life into a happy chaos for the rest of eternity?" Annabella looked at David, who was practically vibrating with excitement. "And you," she asked the boy, "do you accept me as your crazy stepmother?" "I do," David shouted into the microphone. "Then I accept too," she said to Samuel. The hall erupted in applause, cheers, and the sound of 500 people trying to take a picture at the same time. Samuel stood and kissed her while David ran between them shouting, "Family, family, family." And in the middle of all that happy chaos, with flashes going off and people crying with emotion, Annabella thought that maybe, just maybe, fairy tales really did exist. They just came with more soap and pancakes than she had expected. The silence that followed the proposal lasted exactly 3 seconds, long enough for Annabella to process that 500 people, 12 TV cameras, and a news helicopter were waiting for her answer. "Samuel," she said, still looking at him kneeling on stage, "are you sure about this?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Even knowing I'll still be an ex-cleaning lady who talks too much and doesn't know how to use a dessert fork. Especially because of that." David tugged on her dress. "Annabella, does this mean we'll have pancakes every day?" "Only if you promise to eat vegetables too." "Deal." But Annabella still hesitated. She looked at the audience full of people who probably spent more on shoes than she made in a year. "Samuel, have you thought about what will happen after the flashes stop, when we go back to real life and I'm just me?" Samuel slowly stood, took the microphone, and looked directly at her. "Annabella, can I tell you a secret? In front of 500 people? Why not? We've come this far." He turned to the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, you've just heard a woman who thinks of herself as ordinary. Let me tell you what I see." Samuel began walking across the stage, gesturing as if he were giving a corporate presentation. "I see a woman who turned a traumatized boy into a happy child using soap bubbles. I see someone who faced the Miami elite in a work uniform and walked away a winner." The audience began to lean in, some laughing softly. "I see a person who made me question everything I thought was important, who taught me that pancakes on the living room floor are worth more than expensive furniture, that loud laughter is better than elegant silence." "Samuel," Annabella whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "And most of all," he continued, "I see the only person in the world who can make my son feel normal, and who makes me feel human." David was clapping as if it were a private show. "So yes," Samuel said, turning back to Annabella, "I am absolutely sure. I would rather lose everything and have you than win the world and live empty." That was when Elizabeth reappeared. Apparently, security hadn't been enough to hold back a woman on a mission of destruction. She had managed to sneak back into the hall and was now marching toward the stage with a cell phone in her hand. "Samuel Rhodes," she shouted, making everyone turn. "Last chance." "Elizabeth, for heaven's sake," Samuel began. "You have 5 seconds to reconsider before I call my lawyer and sue you for defamation, harassment, and breach of marital contract." "Breach of marital contract," Annabella repeated, incredulous. "You weren't even married. We had a verbal agreement, which you broke when you tried to destroy my life," Samuel said calmly. "So you choose her instead of me?" "Without hesitation. Even knowing I'll sue you for everything you have?" Samuel looked at Annabella, then at David, who was blowing soap bubbles in the middle of the whole drama. "Elizabeth," he said, stepping up to the microphone, "you can keep the company. You can sue for whatever you want. You can try to destroy me financially." He took Annabella's hand and pulled her close. "Because what really matters is right here, in my arms." The audience erupted in a collective "all." Elizabeth turned red with rage. "You'll regret this, all of you." "Probably," Annabella shouted back, "but at least we'll have fun in the process." That was the last straw. Elizabeth stormed out, yelling threats no one was listening to anymore, because David had just discovered how to make giant bubbles, and the stage was turning into a soap bubble party. "Congratulations, Rhodes," Annabella said, laughing as a bubble landed on her nose. "You managed to turn an apology into a detergent commercial." "Hey, David," Samuel shouted to his son, "stop with the bubbles for a second." "Why?" "Because I need to kiss your future stepmother and I don't want to slip." "Kiss?" David shouted into the microphone, making the whole hall hear it. "Gross!" The audience laughed, but Annabella and Samuel only had eyes for each other. "So," Samuel said, still holding her hands, "officially, Annabella Carter, do you agree to marry a workaholic CEO, be stepmother to a boy addicted to soap bubbles, and join the craziest family in Miami?" She pretended to think. "Is there health insurance? The best. Paid vacations? Wherever you want. And can I still make pancakes in the living room?" "I demand you do." "Then I accept." The kiss happened under a shower of soap bubbles. Because David couldn't resist, and went back to his creations. The audience went wild. Flashes exploded like fireworks, and somewhere in the middle of it all, a group of children from the foundation who had been brought to the event started shouting and making their own bubbles. Within minutes, the most elegant hall in Miami Beach had turned into a kindergarten party, with adults in tuxedos and evening gowns running after soap bubbles. "This is a disaster," Mrs. Patterson whispered to Margaret. "This is perfect," Margaret replied, snapping a photo with her phone. When Annabella and Samuel finally pulled away from the kiss, they were laughing and a little dizzy. "You know, this is going to become a meme, right?" she said. "Let it. Better meme of the internet than the unhappiest businessman in Miami." David appeared between them, holding an almost empty bottle. "The soap is gone," he announced tragically. "No problem," Annabella said, pulling a spare bottle from her pocket. "I always have backup." Samuel looked at her in admiration. "You brought extra soap for my marriage proposal?" "Honey, I learned never to leave home without soap when David is around." David clapped his hands. "She's already thinking like family." Samuel laughed and pulled them both into a group hug in the middle of the stage, while the hall remained in full celebration around them. "So," he whispered in Annabella's ear, "will you be the spark of our family?" "Forever," she replied. And somewhere in the middle of the chaos of bubbles, laughter, and camera flashes, 3 hearts finally found their place in the world. 6 months later, the garden of the David Rhodes Foundation was unrecognizable. What had once been a formal and symmetrical space now looked like a fairy tale that had exploded in colors, flowers, and, of course, soap bubble stations spread across every corner. 300 guests filled white chairs arranged in a semicircle, all waiting for the wedding that had become the most talked-about social event of the year. Not because it was luxurious, though it was, but because it promised to be the most entertaining ceremony in Miami's history. "Microphone test," David announced from the improvised altar, dressed in the most spectacular outfit ever seen at a wedding. A white suit with appliques that made him look like a walking giant bubble. "Can everyone hear me?" The audience laughed and applauded. David had insisted on being not just the ring bearer, but also the unofficial master of ceremonies. "Great, because today's the day my dad is marrying my happy spark, and you're all going to cry with emotion." Samuel, waiting at the altar in a tuxedo that cost more than a small car, nervously ran a hand through his hair. "David, remember what we talked about, no spoilers?" "Oops, sorry, Dad, but it's true. Everyone's going to cry." In the front row, Mrs. Patterson was holding a tissue as if it were safety equipment. Margaret was filming everything with 3 different phones, and at the back of the garden, a group of reporters and TV cameras captured every moment for the live broadcast. The music began, an instrumental version of "All You Need Is Love," played by a string quartet David had chosen because it talks about love and everybody knows it. Annabella appeared at the start of the flower-lined aisle, and the whole garden went silent. She was stunning in a simple white silk dress that flowed like water, carrying a small bouquet of daisies. Nothing extravagant, nothing screaming millionaire wedding. It was pure Annabella. Authentic, beautiful, and completely outside the usual mold. As she walked, she could see familiar smiling faces. Marcus, the detective, giving a thumbs up. Employees from Rhodes Tech who had become friends. Children from the foundation waving at her as if she were a Disney princess. And there at the front, Samuel looking at her as if she were a walking miracle. She was halfway down the aisle when David decided the ceremony needed more excitement. "That's my stepmom," he shouted into the microphone, pointing at her. "She makes elephant-shaped pancakes." The audience burst into laughter. Annabella gave a theatrical bow before continuing her walk. But the universe had other plans. In his excitement, David started running toward her to help with the entrance. Forgot he was dressed like a giant bubble, tripped over his own costume, and rolled down the aisle like a snowball. "Houston, we've lit another spark," he shouted as he rolled, making the crowd double over with laughter. Samuel rushed to help his son, Annabella dropped the bouquet to reach him, and Miami's most elegant ceremony turned into a family comedy. I'm fine," David announced, getting up and straightening his costume. "That was just a safety test." "Safety test?" the priest asked, confused. "Yes, to see if my new mom would run to save me. She passed." Annabella helped David up, laughing so hard she was almost crying. "You did that on purpose, didn't you?" "Maybe," David whispered, winking. When they finally reached the altar, everyone was still laughing. The priest, an elderly man who had seen everything in 40 years of service, shook his head with a smile. "Well, this is definitely the most memorable entrance I've ever witnessed." "Father Johnson," Samuel said, "welcome to our family, where normal is relative and chaos is an art form." The ceremony went on with a perfect mix of emotion and comedy. When it came time for the vows, Samuel took the microphone. "Annabella, 6 months ago you walked into my life carrying a bottle of soap solution and changed everything. My house became a home, my son became a happy child, and I became a better person." He paused, his voice catching. "You taught me that love isn't about control. It's about giving control to someone you trust completely." The audience hung on every word. "I promised to spend the rest of my life making you laugh, supporting your dreams, and buying an endless supply of bubble soap." Annabella was crying and laughing at the same time. When it was her turn, she looked at Samuel, then at David, then at the crowd of people who had become her extended family. "Samuel, when I was a child, I was told that princes only existed in fairy tales, that girls like me didn't get happy endings." Her voice trembled, but she went on. "I was fired from 6 jobs for not knowing my place. I was humiliated by people who thought my work defined my worth. I spent years believing I wasn't enough." She held Samuel's hands. "Until one day, a special boy had a crisis in the most expensive lobby in Miami, and I did the only thing I knew how to do. I helped, and I discovered that sometimes all you need to change a life is a little courage and a lot of love." There wasn't a dry eye in the garden. "I promised to be the most annoying wife, the most protective stepmother, and the most loyal partner you've ever had. And I promise never, ever, to leave the house without backup soap." David clapped so hard he almost knocked over the microphone. "Now you can kiss," he announced before the priest even had the chance. "And make it good, because it's on TV." The kiss happened under a shower of bubbles that the Foundation's children released all at once, as if it had been planned. The audience rose to their feet in applause that lasted a full 5 minutes. As the reception exploded around them, with an improvised dance floor, bubble stations for all ages, and a wedding cake that David had helped decorate and which looked more like an abstract sculpture, Samuel pulled Annabella aside for a private moment. "You changed everything," he whispered in her ear, "with a bottle of soap." "Technically," she corrected, "it was with a lot of love and a bit of stubbornness. The best combination in the world." On the other side of the garden, partially hidden behind a tree, Elizabeth watched the party with an expression that mixed anger and defeat. She had lost the lawsuit, lost her credibility, and worst of all, lost the war. But no one cared about Elizabeth anymore. Because in that moment, in the garden of the David Rhodes Foundation, under a starry Miami sky, 3 people who had started as strangers had become the happiest, craziest family in Florida. They began as complete opposites, a controlling millionaire CEO and a bold cleaning lady with zero patience for arrogance. But they discovered that sometimes all it takes to spark a perfect family is a single spark. And sometimes that spark comes in the most unexpected form: a bottle of soap, a lot of love, and the courage to believe that everyone deserves a happy ending. Especially when that happy ending comes with breakfast pancakes and soap bubbles forever. And so ends the incredible journey of Samuel, Annabella, and David. 3 souls who found each other in the most unexpected moment and proved that true love knows no social barriers, corporate protocols, or class differences. From the fearless cleaning lady who dared to challenge a billionaire CEO, to the powerful man who learned that real success is measured in smiles and hugs, this story reminds us that sometimes miracles come disguised as soap bubbles and crooked pancakes. So friends, what did you think of Samuel Rhodes' transformation? Do you think he really deserved Annabella's forgiveness after all that cowardice? Leave your opinion in the comments. We want to know, which moment moved you the most? What did you think of Elizabeth's villainy? Too exaggerated or just right? Did anyone else feel like making pancakes in the middle of the living room after this story? On a scale of 0 to 10, what score would you give this love story? If you made it this far, it means you really connected with our crazy family. And if you enjoyed this story full of twists, humor, and lots of heart, we have much more amazing content waiting for you. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell to get more heartwarming stories like this. Because everyone deserves a happy ending, and we're here to tell these stories that warm your heart and make you believe in true love. See you in the next story. And remember, sometimes all it takes to change your life is a single spark.